If you're planning a weekend camping out to the cottage, or maybe hitting the beach or going out on a boat, or even traveling maybe to another country or even to a board game convention, this is the list for you. I'm going to be going through a whole list of games that you'll want to know about. I'm going to be following a few requirements while I go through this list. First, I want them to be small and easy to take with you. So just by the nature of that, a lot of these are going to be card games, but I'm not restricting myself to that. I also don't want any of these to have a ton of pieces that can easily get lost or blown away in the wind if you decide to play any of these outside. They also need to be very accessible, which means that they're quick to teach and play. This is a niche hobby. I know a lot of us out there are not board gamers or into card games, but with the games I'm going to share with you, anyone would be happy to play these no matter how little of a gamer they are. But with that being said, I also want these games to be fun for the more hardcore gamer or someone that is more into board games, because I don't want something that's just full with a bunch of chaos and flashing colors. So I'm not going to be listing games like Cards Against Humanity, Catchphrase, or Exploding Kittens. Not that there's anything wrong with those games if you find a way to have fun with them, but there's just not a lot of meat there. I haven't listed these games in any particular order other than the fact that I did want to group them a little bit based on their use case. So I'm going to be going through games I think are great if you're traveling by yourself or if you're a passenger and you don't have someone readily to play with. I'm also going to be going through some good two-player games if you do have someone to play with along the way. Then I'm going to be going through a few games that are just great to play out on a patio or if you have a few more people available. And then of course we do need those games for those late nights, possibly with some beverages where you have a ton of people around the table. I'm not strictly limiting myself to 10 games here, and there are a few loopholes, so I'm not sure exactly how to count it, but we're roughly around 10, so we'll just call it good. And for the first category here, this is when you'd be traveling alone or you just don't have someone else to play with, whether you're a passenger on the plane or sitting in the back seat of a car just trying to pass the time. And just to get things straight here, I am not a solo gamer, so the games that I've picked are accessible even for myself. These are games that I actually play, so even if you're not into solo games, I think you'll still really want to check these out because you'll be happy that you have them when you do run into these situations that I just described. And my first recommendation is Palm Island, and this is a game that does play up to 2 players. I've never tried it that way. I think the game plays quite a bit differently, but it is a great solo game. And the reason for this is because it's really easy to play, it's a lot of fun, and you can literally play it anywhere because it all plays in the palm of your hands. The way the game works is that you're just going to be shuffling up a deck of cards, then you're going to be holding it in one of your hands. The only thing you need to set up here is that at the back of the deck, you're going to be putting the round card, and any time that you get to that round card, you're going to be rotating it or flipping it, indicating that you've moved on to the next round, and then you just continue as normal. But essentially this is a resource management engine building card game with some deck building elements, because you're going to be acquiring different resources throughout the game because each of the cards does act as a resource that's shown at the top of the card, and normally a free action associated with it that will allow you to rotate that card 90 degrees, indicating that you now have access to those resources. You'll be able to do this repeatedly to stack up resources and build up your pool that you'll be able to spend later, because a lot of these cards also have other options available on them as well that will require you to spend certain resources in order to flip or rotate that card to upgrade it to a different form. And this is essentially how you build your engine, because each time you upgrade your cards, you're going to be going through the entire round, and then you'll be going through those cards again in the following round. Whichever cards that you manage to upgrade are going to be giving you some more powerful options in that following round. But like I said, there's a whole bunch of different cards here, and depending on the cards that you upgrade, you might be getting something that builds up your engine, but then also gives you victory points for the end of the game. Then there are also some buildings that will require certain resources that you can build as well that may not give you any particular special action that you'll be able to use further in the game, but they do give you a ton of victory points at the end of the game. And that's how you assess how well you've done in the game, because there is a scorecard provided with some different ranges of victory points so you know how well you've done. But a neat thing here that you can also include in the game if you are interested is that there's a bunch of bonus cards that you'll be able to unlock by accomplishing different feats. And anytime that you accomplish one of those feats, you'll be adding that card into your deck permanently, which makes the game play a little bit differently every time you play it as you are unlocking those different cards. Looking at these cards ahead of time can also give you a few other goals that you can try to achieve other than just trying to go for these victory points. And if you are interested, there are other games that you can play in the palm of your hand, just like this one. I've played a few others as well. I didn't like them as much as this one, so this is the one that I would recommend. And I think you can also get this one with plastic cards, which makes them pretty much indestructible, so you don't have to worry about getting them wet at the beach or having them wear out or bend as you're traveling. And my next couple games are a bit of a cheat here. Like I said, I am not a solo gamer, so I really need something that just makes it easy for me. And honestly, there are a lot of great card games that you can find on your mobile phone that you can take along with you, at least until your battery runs out, but that's why we have Palm Island. But one that's a ton of fun and I highly recommend is Slay the Spire. This is an excellent card game that you can play on your phone. In fact, it works really well because trying to convert this into a real life card game would be quite a challenge. They have turned it into a board game, tweaking a lot of the rules. So if you do like this, you can check out the board game as well. But this one is a roguelike deck builder that's really well designed because in this game you actually get to play as a bunch of different heroes that each have different decks that you'll be able to modify as you play the game. But essentially you're going to be moving up the spire that's going to be presenting you with a bunch of different paths. You do get to kind of see what the paths have to offer, and you're going to be choosing which direction you want to go, weighing the pros and cons, whether you want to try and get more items or whether you want to try and fight more enemies. But there are a ton of enemies to go up against, and there's a ton of different combinations that you can do while building your deck. And there's also some really challenging bosses that you'll be able to fight and hopefully take out as you get better and better at the game, because this is a game that is quite a challenge. And you're going to have to discover the different cards and how they work together and figure out your strategies as you go up against these tougher and tougher bosses as you make it up the different spires. And you will be discovering some alternate endings as you get better at the game. But if you're looking for a more traditional board game, I would highly recommend the Agricola Revised Edition. This is probably my favorite reimplementation of a board game that I've ever played on a mobile phone. If you've ever played Agricola or its sister game Caverna, I think you'll definitely want to check this one out because it does add something extra to the game that makes it really fun for solo play. And you are trying to get a certain amount of victory points in order to win the solo game, but the interesting thing here is that the amount that you have to get every time you play the game increases each game that you win. But in order to help you get that higher amount, you actually get to keep one of your ability cards that you bought in the previous game. So every time you play this game, you'll be able to buy a bunch of ability cards, and then you'll always be able to choose one to carry forward, stacking those together as you play throughout your entire solo campaign. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a classic Euro game where you're going to be building up your houses, growing your family, growing crops, as well as farming animals, all to earn victory points. But you'll also be able to gain some special abilities along the way. And the game goes over a series of rounds where you're going to be performing your actions and then growing your crops and then paying in order to feed your family. Of course, the bigger the family, the more that you'll have to feed them, but also having more members of your family means that you can perform more actions. So that's just a balance that you'll have to figure out depending on your strategy for that particular game. Like I said, I've played a ton of mobile board games, but this is one that I always come back to, and I've had this one on my phone for several years, and I still do have it on my phone. But as I was filming this video, I was trying to pull it up on the Google Play Store, and apparently it's no longer there. I guess Asmodee pulled it down, but it looks like it is still available on iPhone and iPad. But because this isn't available on Android anymore, at least not through your conventional ways, I will alternatively recommend Terraforming Mars, because this one is still available no matter what platform you're on, and it's also an excellent solo experience. At the start of the game, you're going to be choosing a corporation that gives you some certain resources as well as a couple special abilities. You're going to be taking advantage of those as you buy different cards, chain them together, and build up a bit of an engine to generate different resources that you'll be able to convert in order to terraform Mars. But like I said, I do like the Agricola app a lot more than this one, so if you do have the option, I would recommend Agricola, but this is also a fantastic game. And if you're on Android and you just can't get Agricola right now, then this is the next best thing, even though it is quite a different game. And another thing I should probably point out is that if you are on Android and you do search this, you might see the Agricola All Creatures Big and Small. That is a different game. It might still be fun. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but it's just a lighter version of Agricola, so it should be okay if you want to try that one as well. But the revised edition is the one that I recommend. And the next few games I have for you are great when you're traveling with a friend, and I do have a few different options here, but the first one I want to go over is a game called Hive, and this one is really special for a few different reasons. But before we get into all of those, the simple way to describe this game is that it is a lot like chess, but it's a lot more quick to play, and I would say it's a lot more fun, and I am a fan of chess. In this game, each player is going to be playing as either the white tokens or the black tokens, and the whole goal of the game is to be the first player to completely surround your opponent's B. The B is always the third token that you have to put down, but players are just going to be alternating back and forth, putting tokens into the grid so that they are attached in one way or another. But each of these tokens do have different attributes about them in the way that they can move and the way that they can be placed into the grid. But the main thing that is so cool about this game, other than how quick it can play and how fun it is that you can play it anywhere. You could play this game underwater if you really wanted to, because these tokens are near indestructible. You can take it to the beach just like you can see here, but you can also just play it anywhere at a picnic table, out in the wind, because these are not going to get blown away. They do have quite a lot of heft to them, but there is also a Hive pocket version if you'd rather have a version that's even more portable. And I do have the non-pocket version, and it still is really easy to take around with you because I can just throw this into whatever, a backpack, a briefcase, doesn't matter. I don't have to worry about it getting damaged because, like I said, those tokens are nearly indestructible. And once you get comfortable with the bugs that are offered in this game, there's even more that you can add through expansions, and they are all a ton of fun with their unique characteristics. Highly recommend this one. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. And another amazing two-player game that you should definitely have in your collection if you're going to be traveling around, but even if you're just a fan of card battlers, because this one is a ton of fun, and this one's called Mindbug, and it is a card battler just like I said. So if you've played old games like Magic the Gathering, or if you've played other games similar to that, even like Pokemon, or even some of the newer games like Keyforge, this follows a lot of those similar characteristics, where each player is going to have their own set of cards that they're going to be putting out on the table in front of them, attacking their opponents and trying to be the last one standing. And I think it's roughly about a full 52 card deck, but you're only dealing 10 cards to each player, which means that every time you play this game, you're getting a completely different mix of cards that you're going to be playing with, because the rest of the cards are not used at all. They just add more variety each time you play the game so that every game plays differently than the last. Each player just has 3 health in this game, and to win the game you just need to fully deplete your opponent of all their health. And of course, the way that you do that is by playing your cards, using their actions and abilities and attacks in order to attack your opponent. And whenever you do that, your opponent gets to either take the damage directly, losing one of their health, or they can choose to block the attack with one of the cards that they currently have in play. Damage is not carried over in this game, it's just whichever card has the highest health wins, assuming that there isn't any special abilities or effects that might modify that, and there are a lot of those in this game that you'll want to be taking advantage of. But I really like this because it just means one less thing to track, making this a lot easier to get to the table. But there is another special thing about this game, and that is the Mindbug, because each player is going to have 2 special cards that you hold off to the side throughout the entirety of the game until you decide to use them. And the way that the Mindbug works is that anytime your opponent plays a card onto the table in front of them, you can choose to use your Mindbug in order to take that card as if you played it for yourself. This gives each player a bit of an ace up their sleeve that they'll want to time appropriately, trying to use it at the point that is most beneficial for them, or to try and stop one of their opponent's strategies. Of course, it's good to try and hang on to these as long as possible, because once your opponent knows that you don't have any mind bugs left, they know that they're free to play any of their cards without the risk of having it stolen. I really love this game. Not only is it a really fun game, but I think it also fixes a lot of issues that I've had with previous card battlers that I've played in the past. So if you haven't checked this one out and you do like card battlers, or if you're just looking for a really fun 2-player game that plays quick and easy, this is definitely one that you'll want to add to your collection. And this next one is a little bit more sophisticated and excellent with a glass of wine, and this one is of course The Fox and the Forest. And if you're not familiar with this, it is a 2-player trick-taking game. And if you're not familiar with trick-taking games, you've probably played one before. I think the most commonly known trick-taking game is euchre, so if you're familiar with that, it does share some of those elements. Mainly the portion where there is always a suit that is out on the table. This suit is going to be known as trump, and then players are going to be alternating starting a trick by putting one of their cards onto the table, and then the other player has to follow that suit if they're able to do so. If they're not, they can use any other card from their hand, and the only cards that they can play that can actually beat the suit that was led is of course only the trump suit. And of course, whichever player played the highest card, accounting for the difference in the suits, is going to be winning that trick and taking it as a point. But something that is really cool about Fox in the Forest, other than its fantastic art, is that each of the odd-numbered cards in every single suit are going to have some sort of special ability associated with them, which gets activated when you play that card. Not only this, but it's a two-player trick-taking game, which isn't too common, but it's also just really well done. And one of the reasons for that is the way that the scoring works, and this is very unique to this game because in this game you are trying to win tricks, but you're also trying to control how many tricks you win, because the way that the scoring works in this game is that the more tricks that you get, the more points you get until you hit a certain threshold, and then you get into greedy territory where you actually get 0 points and your opponent will get 6. This creates a really interesting dynamic in the game where you might be trying to win tricks at first, but then you find that your opponent is actually winning a lot of them, and then you also notice that you think that you can force them to win the rest. That might be a really good strategy for you to just try and force your opponent to win as many tricks as possible so that they end up in the greedy territory. This, of course, is not easy to do, and it's not going to happen every single round, but when it does, it really is a lot of fun to watch your opponents squirm. Sevens in this game are also special, and whether or not you win or lose that round, you'll be getting 1 point for every 7 that you're able to acquire into your hand. So it's always interesting trying to incorporate those into the different tricks. And regardless of whichever strategy you're trying to deploy, you're trying to make sure to get as many of the 7s into your tricks at the end of that round. And we're halfway through the games here, so if you have found this video useful and you think I deserve it, I do appreciate a like and subscribe. It's a free way to show your support, but that's all I want to say. Let's get back to the games. And of course, while you're traveling, you're probably going to be meeting up with some friends or perhaps making some new friends. And it's always good to have a few games in hand that can play just a few more people. And those are the types of games I'm going to recommend now that are even great to play at a patio or at a picnic table. And the first one we have here is a card game called Scopa. And this one is another trick-taking game, and I've only ever played this one at 4 players, so that's what I would recommend, but it can play with other player counts as well. And if you are traveling through Italy, this one definitely earns you some bonus points because this one is actually a traditional Italian card game. And yes, you can play this game with a traditional deck of poker cards. All you have to do is remove a few of the cards from the deck. But if you are able to, I do recommend getting the traditional deck of Italian cards because it does add that bit of culture and the little bit of fun that comes along with using something a little bit more unconventional. And like I said, this one is also a trick-taking game, so if you have played euchre, this won't be completely foreign to you, but it does play a little bit differently. Just like in euchre, when you're playing with 4, you're going to be paired with the person across from you, and then you're going to be combining your points at the end of the game in order to see which team wins. But the interesting thing about this game is there's actually a whole bunch of different ways to score points. But before I get into the scoring, I'll just give you a little bit more of an overview on how the game actually plays. And this is a game that's really easy to set up and play because all you're going to be doing is dealing 3 cards to each player, and then you're going to have a number of cards out on the table. And players are just going to be taking turns trying to match a card from their hand with one of the cards out on the table. If you can find a match, you just take both those cards and then you put those down on the table as a trick. Or if you can't make a match, you can also add up multiple cards from the table so that they equal one of the cards in your hand. But if you're unable to do any of that, then you actually have to choose one of the cards from your hand to leave on the table with the other cards, making it available for other players or yourself to pick up in a following turn. The round continues like this until all players have played all the cards in their hand, and then you're just dealing 3 cards out to all the players again, and you continue until the entire deck has run out. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of different ways to score points in this game, and that's just one of the reasons of why this is one of my all-time favorite trick-taking games. Because even though your turns are pretty simple, just trying to match cards from your hand with the ones on the table, because there's so many different ways to score points, you have a lot of options to try and roll with the punches, and even when you can't play a card, you're trying to put down a card that you think your teammate might find useful. And the first and most fun way to score a point is by achieving a Scopa, and Scopa in Italian literally just means to sweep. So you might have guessed it, in order to score a point for a Scopa, all you have to do is be the player that completely clears the cards on the table. Whether you're picking up the last card by matching one in your hand or by combining multiple of them. And whenever you do that, you still take that trick as normal, but instead of putting it face down in front of you, you're going to put it face up, indicating that you swept all the cards from the table, and that will score you a point at the end of the game. And the other points are all going to be calculated at the end of the game as well. There's going to be a point for whoever has the most cards. There's also going to be a point for the dinero, which means whoever has the most cards of the coin suit. And then there's also sette bello, which is just the 7 of coins. Whoever has that is going to be earning their team a point. And then there's also the Primera, which is kind of a complicated scoring, and I've never played it traditionally. I've always just played it in the way that whoever has the most 7s also gains a point, But I guess in the interest of giving you the actual rules here, I just pulled it up on the screen now, and it says the highest score or Primera is calculated by finding the best card in each of the 4 suits in a player's captured card collection, and then you're going to be using this chart to determine whoever has the highest. I don't think pulling up this chart at the start or end of the game to go over with all the players is all that fun for anyone, so I'm just going to stick with the most 7s. And my next recommendation here is an especially great one anytime that you find yourself heading out for a camping trip, or if you're going hiking or doing anything out in the wilderness. Because in this one, players are going to be playing as survivors in a plane crash, scavenging their food and trying to survive until they are rescued. This one's actually a cooperative game, which is a little bit different from the games that I've offered you so far. But my only issue with this one is that it might be a little bit more difficult to find. This one is more of a niche game. It's not as commonly found, but I think you can still find it either on Amazon or other outlets. And another thing I should point out here is that you might want to go through some of the insanity cards and remove some of them that you might be a little bit more uncomfortable with, because there are some that have more party elements. They're not that bad, but they might be a little awkward depending on how familiar you are with the people around you. But this is a game that just uses a few different decks of cards. At the start of the game, each player is going to be getting an itinerary card that lets them know their name, as well as a special effect or ability that they'll be able to use within the game. Then each player is going to be getting a whole bunch of wooden hearts, and at the start of the game you just put those all in your hand and throw them on the table, and whatever amount is shown up, that's how much health you have for the game. Of course, finding food will help you increase your health, but there are a lot of ways to lose it as well. If you lose all your health, you do get temporarily eliminated from the game, but there are ways that the other players can bring you back, and it is a really quick game to play, so I don't think there's a huge issue for elimination in this game. And this is a game that plays over a number of rounds, with each round having a day phase and a night phase. During the day phase, each player is going to be betting a number of their hearts in order to draw that many cards from the resource deck. Each card that you draw could give you some sort of benefit, either finding food or different resources that you can use to build gear. And there's a whole crafting guide provided on a player aid that once you get those amount of resources, you can then just craft any of those items, which can help you against different events or just help you improve what you can do throughout the game. And since this is a cooperative game, you might find yourself trading and giving some of your goods to some of the other players that aren't doing so hot. But of course, this is also a survival game, and if you die, you're eliminated. So you always do want to help yourself just a little bit more than everyone else. So don't be afraid to be a little bit stingy. But after the day phase, you're going to be moving into the night phase, and this is where you're going to be revealing one of the night cards. These can have all sorts of different effects, and you're only going to be playing with a certain amount of them within a given game. You can put more into the game if you want to make it more difficult, but essentially you're trying to get through this entire deck so that you can be rescued, and however many players are still alive at the end of the game, they survive and technically win, but everyone wins just a little bit more if everyone survives. But each of these different night cards could have all sorts of different effects, some worse than others, and players will find themselves fighting against animals or the weather or a whole bunch of different effects. But if any player at any point finds himself with only one heart left, then they have to draw a card from the Insanity deck. And these have all sorts of different effects that normally aren't too helpful to the group. Luckily, you can help your teammate recover from their insanity by helping them get above the 1 health point, and then normally they'll be able to discard that card. And the rounds just continue like this until you find that rescue card at the bottom portion of that night deck. Once you find that card, all the surviving players will then be rescued and thankful for everyone else's humble sacrifices. And my next recommendation here is a competitive game, and this one is basically just a deck of cards, so it's also just super easy to take along with you, but I'd be less inclined to play this one outside if it is a windy day, because you will have a lot of cards out on the table, so depending on the amount of cover that you have, you might want to consider bringing this one indoors. This one's called Port Royal, and it's one of my favorite push your luck card games, because in this game you're just going to be getting dealt 3 cards at the start of the game, but you don't actually care what's on those cards. In fact, you shouldn't even look at them, because each of the cards will be doubling as whatever the card is, but then also as a coin, and anytime that you have that card face down, it's acting as a coin. So essentially I'm just taking a long time to say that those 3 cards that you get at the start of the game are just coins. But this is a game that just plays over a series of turns, and when it is your turn, you're just going to be drawing a card from the deck and then putting it face up on the table. And you can do this as many times as you like, but where the push your luck aspect comes into play is that there are a whole bunch of different colored boats in this deck of cards, and anytime you get 2 boats of the same color, you bust and your turn is instantly over and you don't get to do anything else on your turn. And the reason that you really don't want to bust in this game is that as you're drawing those cards out, you are essentially creating the market for that turn. And as the player that's drawing those cards, you actually get first choice from that market. So as soon as you decide to stop and you're happy with the cards that are on display, you can then spend any of the coins that you have in order to purchase one of the cards that have a cost associated with them, which you can see at the bottom of the card. Or instead, you can take one of the ships, which normally just grant you an amount of coins, and you can just take them absolutely for free. You might also notice that these ships do have a number of swords on the bottom of them, and that's because some of the cards you buy can actually earn you a number of swords. And if the amount of swords that you have on your cards is higher than the amount on a ship, then you can just discard that ship when you draw it as if it was never drawn. Of course, doing this does raise the likelihood that you'll be able to draw out more cards without busting, but there is something really cool about drawing multiple ships of different colors, because if you do draw enough ships of different colors, you'll actually be able to take 2 cards from the market, and if you draw even more than that, you can take up to 3 cards from the market. But once you've stopped and chosen your cards, then each of the other players at the table also get a chance to purchase a card. The only thing that's different with them is if they decide to do so, they also have to pay 1 coin to you on top of the cost of that card. This is another reason why you might try to get more cards out on the table, because it can earn you additional coins if another player wants to take a card. But there's a whole bunch of different types of cards in the game and different objectives that you can try and go for in order to gain more victory points. And essentially you're trying to be the first to get to 12 victory points in order to win the game. But there is something to note here as well, because inside the deck there are a few tax cards. And if that tax card ever gets drawn and you happen to have more than 12 coins in your hand, then you're going to get charged a tax and you actually have to discard half of your coins. So if you have a lot of money in this game, you're going to want to try and spend it as quickly as possible, because you can definitely bet that the other players are going to be trying to draw as many cards as they can to try and draw that tax card in order to burn half of your cash pile. And if you are interested in this game, it might be good to know that there was also a new big box version that was released with all the expansions, which is a great option because some of these expansions are actually pretty hard to get. The artwork in this version is quite a step up, especially when it comes to the ships. I've chosen to keep my original version of the game just for one particular reason, and that's that they decided to make the artwork go all the way to the edges. I do sleeve my cards for the games that I play a lot, and this is definitely one of those games. And when you sleeve your cards, you do tend to see a reflection, and I'm a little bit worried that because the color of the ships is very different from the colors from the other cards, I think you might be able to distinguish that while you're drawing cards, which will unintentionally give you some information about what cards are coming up next. And for a push your luck game like this, it's really important that that information isn't spoiled. And if any of you do own the newer version of this game and you do sleeve your cards, I'm interested to know whether or not this is actually a problem, so feel free to leave your comment down below, because that could be helpful information for anyone that's trying to decide which version of this game is right for them. And one thing I know to be a definitive truth, at least from my own travel experience, is that there's going to be those inevitable late nights where you're just with a ton of friends, maybe having a drink or two, but definitely having a ton of laughs. And definitely not from personal experience, I'm going to assume that cognitive power is low in this situation, and that's just fine, because that's where these games that I'm about to recommend thrive. And for the first one, I do have the game Bluff pulled up here on BGG. I think this is a great way to experience the game, and this is a great way to jump into it. It comes with everything you need to play the game, as well as the rules, and even this handy board. That is definitely not needed, but it really helps just lock in the way that the game works, and just makes it easier for you to actually play the game if you do have the board. But like I said, it's definitely not needed, because the game that this is based on, and the one that I'm actually recommending here, is called Liar's Dice. And all you need to play Liar's Dice is just 5 dice for each of the players, and then a cup that they can use to roll and hide their dice. And with a bit of design experience, and from my own personal opinion from playing a whole bunch of different games a whole bunch of different ways, I think Bluff is actually a really solid implementation of the game Liar's Dice. There is another really common version that you might find in your travels, and that's known as Perudo. This one is also good, but I wouldn't recommend this one over Bluff. I just think between the differences between these two games, Bluff does it a little bit better for each of those differences. But like I said, you don't need to buy this off the shelf. You can just buy a bunch of dice at a really affordable price, and there's normally going to be cups anywhere that you're going, so finding cups is normally not an issue. But the way that you play this game is that you just give each player 5 dice. Each player is going to be putting all their dice into their cup, shaking it up and rolling it, and then putting that cup face down, and then just peeking at their own set of dice. Based on what you see there, you'll be able to know what dice you have, but you don't know what dice everyone else has. One player starts the betting, and the way that this works is that they're just going to be making a guess that there is at least a certain amount of dice of a certain value across all the players' dice. So in this example, he says 4 threes, so then it moves on to the next player, and they have the option to either call that player a liar, and then at that point, all the players reveal their dice, and if there is in fact at least 4 threes, the person who called them a liar would lose a die. But let's say that there was only 1 3, then the player that made the guess would instead be the one losing a die. Of course, when you lose all your die, you are out of the game, and the last player standing wins. But rather than calling the player a liar, you can also choose to up the bet. And whenever you do this, you're just going to be choosing either a higher number or a higher value of die. Since the previous player said 4 threes, a valid bet on top of that would be to just raise the number of threes to something like 5, 6, or 7 threes. Or instead you could change the 3 to a higher value and then go with any number of that value of die. So you could say something like 1 4 or 1 5 or 5 5s, however you want to do it, as long as it is higher than the 4 threes. Eventually this is going to get to a value where the next player no longer wants to raise the bet, and they're going to try and call the previous player's bluff, and then that's resolved like I previously explained, and the game just continues like this. Really fun game, really affordable, you can play it anywhere, and it's guaranteed to have a ton of laughs, and I've never had a bad time with this game. So if you don't have a way to play Liar's Dice yet, I highly recommend just getting a bunch of dice and maybe a few small cups that are easy to take along with you. It's easy to play outside, it doesn't matter if it gets wet, it's a great game to have, and you won't regret it. And for my next recommendation, this one actually has quite a lot of similarities to Liar's Dice, but it is a bit different of a game, and this one is called Skull. And this one also plays up to 6 players, so you can play it with quite a lot of people. But the way this game works is that each player is going to have a number of coasters that they're going to have in front of them, and then one of them is going to have a skull on it. Players are able to look at these and put them in any order that they would like. You can put as many of your coasters down in front of you. You could include a skull, you could not include a skull. Whichever player is the starting player is going to make a bet that they think they can flip a number of coasters without hitting a skull. But the catch here is that you always have to flip your own coasters first. But whenever you do make a bet, it moves over to the next player where they can either choose to up your bet by saying a higher number that they think they can flip successfully, or they can choose to challenge you. If they do choose to challenge you, you're going to have to flip as many coasters as you said you would, and like I said, you do have to start with your own set of coasters. So if you do have a skull in there, you're probably going to bust, which is going to cost you one of your coasters. So you might be asking, why would you ever make a bet if you already know that there's a skull in your stack of coasters? And the answer to that is because this is a bluffing game. You're hoping that the player after you doesn't call your bluff and instead makes a bet, or maybe even some of the following players make bets, and then they might think that your coaster stack is safe because they saw you confidently make a bet, which hopefully you have planted a nice skull for them. And of course, the more coasters you lose, the harder it is for you to bluff. And if you do lose all your coasters, then you are eliminated from the game. And you can win the game if you are the last player standing, but you can also win the game early if you successfully complete 2 challenges. So it is in your interest to try and get challenged. And my last recommendation for this group of games is known as Cockroach Poker. And this one is probably the easiest game to play ever because all you're doing is dealing out a bunch of cards to each of the players. And then there are a whole bunch of different vermin on the cards. There's rats, scorpions, spiders, a whole bunch of other things, but I think there's only 8 of each, and that's important information to let everyone know at the start of the game, because as soon as you get 4 of the same cards stuck in front of you, then you are eliminated from the game and everyone else wins. And because just one player loses in a game of Cockroach Poker, that makes this game very, very special because everyone else gets to point and laugh. But the way this game works is that there's always going to be an active player each and every turn, and whichever player that is, they're going to be choosing one card from their hand and then passing it to another player in secret, telling them what that card is. Of course, this is also a bluffing game, so they don't have to tell the truth, but they can tell the truth if they feel like it. The interesting thing here is that it doesn't really matter whether that player lied or not, other than the message that they're trying to portray, because it's up to the player who's accepting the card to either say, yes, I believe you, or no, I don't believe you, or I don't want to make a decision, so I'm just going to look at the card myself and pass it to another player doing the exact same thing. Because yes, that is an option as well. But if they don't want to pass the card along, or if they're not able to pass the card along because they were the last available player past that card, then they have the option of either saying, yes, I believe you, it is the card you say it is, or no, I don't believe you. And it doesn't really matter whether or not the other player lied. All that mattered is if they guessed incorrectly, then they have to keep that card in front of them. But if they were correct, then the player who is trying to give the card to them has to keep it in front of them instead. And whenever someone is on the losing side of a challenge, like I said, they're the ones to gain the card, but then they're also the ones to start the next round. And this might sound really basic and like there's not a lot of strategy here, and it is somewhat fringing on that, but there is a bit of strategy here because you can see what cards you have in your hand, you can see what cards are already out on the table, and you can also see what cards other people don't want to get in front of them because they're getting dangerously close to losing the game, which means that if you're passing the card that could cost someone to lose the game, everyone at the table is incentivized to try and give that card to that player last to get that card in front of them, causing them to lose the game. But then that player will also know that the other players are potentially trying to do that. But then also all the players can't really communicate other than lying or not lying to each other. So there is just a bunch that you're trying to look into as you're passing these cards along the table. I'm not saying there's a whole lot of strategy here, but it is there if you look for it, and you will see it when you play the game, and that's why it's one that I do recommend. The game continues like this until one player has 4 of the same cards in front of them, and then everybody laughs at them. And those are all the games I recommend that you can take along with you wherever you might go. They're easy to play, easy to teach, fun for everyone, and you don't have to break the bank to get these in your collection. Feel free to let me know what you think about these different games in the description below, or if you have some other recommendations that you want to share, I'd be happy to check them out. And I'm sure that many of us watching this now would love to hear what works for you. One of the reasons that I wanted to make this video right now is because I myself do have some travel plans coming up. I'm going to be attending a board game convention in Connecticut known as the Level Up event. I'll leave a link to it in the description below if you are interested in checking it out. And with this in mind, there is one more bonus game I want to add to my list, but it's not a specific game, but it's still something that I think we should all be thinking about anytime we're traveling, whether it's to a board game convention or to even another country. And that's just to play something new. Find something either that you have been wanting to play, or maybe that's local to the area that you're visiting. Feel free to talk to the people that you meet there. Ask them, hey, is there any traditional card games? If you're in Italy, they might say Scopa. If you're somewhere else, they might say something else. Don't be afraid to try new things and experience their culture, or just experience some of the favorite games of the people that you might be visiting if they happen to have a few board games of their own. But if you're more like a gamer like me and you're more likely to find yourself heading to a board game convention like this one, this is a great opportunity to try and play one of the games that you've always wanted to play, or maybe a game that you're considering buying. I always recommend trying to play a game before you buy it, because that can really save you a lot of money if it turns out not to be for you. Or if it does turn out to be a game that you love, at least you can buy it with confidence and not have buyer remorse later. Conventions like these ones just have a ton of wonderful people that are easy to talk to and happy to play games with you, and a lot of them probably already know the rules to the game that you want to play, which just makes learning it that much easier. Of course, the main thing is to just have fun at these conventions, so still play the games you love, still play the games that just happen to appear in front of you, but just don't be shy to try and recommend a game that you might really want to try, because a lot of people there will just be happy to help you have that experience. And if you are looking for another gamer and you are heading to the Level Up event here in July, definitely feel free to reach out to me. You can find me over on the Discord, and I would be happy to meet up, play some games, or just hang out, and just have a good time. I'll also leave a coupon code down below for any of you that do end up deciding to attend, and that'll get you a $10 discount on any of the tickets that you decide to buy. And that's everything I have for you today. I hope there's something there that you thought looked like fun that you can share with your friends and families and just make some really solid memories. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full. What?